an immortal being of untold power, an ancient curse and a trail of bodies that follow him wherever he goes. His monster is driven by desire and forbidden love, and will stop at nothing to reclaim what he's lost. Your only chance against him is to pray you don't cross paths with the mummy.
They broke in upon me and found me doing an unholy thing.
I want to live, even in this strange new world.
In the span of roughly a year, Universal Pictures had gone from near total failure to a string of successes, with two massive hits, those being Dracula and Frankenstein, and a superstar in the making. Boris Karloff, or Karloff the Uncanny as he was now known as, was eyed for another horror picture to keep up with the momentum created by the previous two iconic monsters. An initial treatment was written based around Italian occultist Alessandro Cagliostro, called Cagliostro. This early concept was then sent to John Balderston to write the full script. Balderston had a love for ancient history and had previously worked as a journalist, covering the excavation of the tomb of King Tutankhamun. And so, because of this deep interest and knowledge of ancient Egypt, he brought the storyline there. In addition to the change in the setting, Balderston's influence on the story can be found in its many parallels to Dracula, of which he penned the American stage adaptation, including the villain's wise counterpart, the protective religious symbols, and the themes of love and obsession, making the titular mummy a bit of a twisted sort of romantic figure.
For thy sake I was buried alive. I ask of thee only a moment of agony.
To help bring that figure to life, the Mummy reunited makeup artist Jack Pierce with star Boris Karloff in one of the most demanding jobs either of them had ever had, reportedly taking more than 8 hours just to apply the makeup and wrappings, which then only appear in the film's opening scene. However time-consuming though the process was, it absolutely paid off, giving this monster an unforgettable and all too realistic look, cementing its iconic status and inspiring multiple remakes and sequels. In one of the rare instances that a remake had nearly as much cultural impact as the original and even threatened to supplant it, 1999 saw the Stephen Sommers directed version of The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser as leading man Rick O'Connell, Rachel Weisz as the scholar and love interest Evie, and Arnold Vosloo as the mummy himself, Imhotep. The film perfectly blended action with suspense, even integrating moments of levity, proving to be arguably the best remake any of the classic monsters would ever get. In much the same way that the story borrowed heavily from Dracula, the visual style of The Mummy also drew heavily from Universal's first monster. Karl Freund, Dracula's director of photography, traded in his camera for the director's chair, with Charles Stumar photographing this film. In the role of director, Freund continues to show his technical expertise, giving an interesting look into how a cinematographer would approach directing, focusing primarily on creating moody atmosphere for the characters to live in, more than staging those characters in any particular fashion. While commonly thought of as the person who controls the look of the shots, the role of the director is much more about staging and placing actors and objects in a particular manner, and having an overall vision of the look of the film, while the cinematographer is the one who designs the lighting and the exact shot composition, with the two working in tandem to craft the image. With this in mind, pay attention to how Freund stages his actors compared to someone like James Whale. Freund tends to let the shot composition create the emotional tone of the scene and places his actors almost haphazardly, generally either lumping them together into groups or squaring them up next to each other. Whale, on the other hand, while not nearly as stylistic or technically minded, has a keen eye for how the actors might be placed to create dramatic moments. Watching this film back-to-back with its predecessor Frankenstein gives a unique opportunity to see the different thought process between director and cinematographer and how each of them approaches the craft of filmmaking. Many of Freund's unique expressionistic styles are on display in this film, with moving camera shots like dolly shots, often motivated by emotions rather than actions, and harsh, dramatic lighting, emphasizing mood and tone, while blending masterfully with realistic motivations. Let's examine the introduction of the mummy. After the opening scene establishes the curse and each of the characters' stances on it, we start on a medium shot for our first unlucky victim, as he pores over the ancient scroll before panning to the mummy, and then back to the victim. The camera then dollies into a close-up of him as he reads the text, before cutting to a close-up on Imhotep, tilting down as he awakens and his hands begin to move. The lighting for this scene, while highly stylized, makes perfect sense, as it's established by a practical light, or light you can see in the shot, like this table lamp, which then allows for motivated lights, or lights that mimic the look of practicals, to then enhance the effect, uplighting our monster in a classic way, but that makes sense in context of the scene. Another brilliant example of this technique comes later when Imhotep calls out to a Noxanamun, this time with a small oil lamp acting as the practical light, allowing then for a logical reason to give him this dramatic lighting design. Another beautifully shot scene demonstrating just how well Freund and Stumar understood how to use motivated lights, and one that had direct influences on how horror films are shot now, is when Imhotep is caught by the museum guards. We see the guard switch on his flashlight and then cut to his subjective angle looking for the mummy. The light tracks along the wall until finding Imhotep, and then in the next shot, we see this light on the opposite side as a guard moves to turn on the lights. This would have been achieved by use of a leko, or a stage light, to create a small circle to mimic the flashlight. While it's done so incredibly well, if you watch closely, when he moves closer to the wall, you can see that the light no longer moves with his hand for a brief moment before resuming its motion. One more incredible use of lighting is for the eerie close-ups on Imhotep as he asserts his influence on others. Much like in Dracula, Freund uses eye lights to convey this supernatural effect, but in a different but equally effective way. He starts off the shot by lighting the mummy with a large key light from above pointed down, creating a prominent and ominous shadow over his eyes. This is then supplemented by two very bright backlights, or hair lights, angled on his shoulders and bottom half of his face, making for an incredible portrait in its own right. Then, Freund and Stumar added a large source fixed with a dimmer nearly directly in front of Karloff, and added a cucaloris, or cookie, which is a large wooden frame with patterns cut into it, allowing for light only to pass through two holes for his eyes, illuminating the eyes without the rest of his face. While there are other ways that this look can be achieved, especially with how precise lighting instruments are in modern days, in 1932, this technique would have been the best option, and it's the one that they used, as evidenced by the fact that portions of the background and Karloff's ear are also hit by this light when it's lit. The overall effect is nothing short of incredible, and shows master artists in their element. The Mummy's visual style has had a lasting impact on how cinematography is approached, blending mood with realistic motivations, treating the viewer to images that are simply mesmerizing to watch.
Power of Imhotep is felt well beyond the screen, captivating audiences, even from within his tomb. Thank you for joining me in this excavation of the mummy, and I invite you to tune in next time as I continue my series on the monsters of Universal Pictures.